So, what do you think the key challenges are presently that farmers are facing? And how does your company help them navigate these difficulties while staying competitive?
I think working with their mill, their processing plants, their grower, packer, shipper, whatever label they're selling their crop under, understanding kind of what they're doing and where their focuses are, and then somehow challenging and kind of just staying abreast of what's happening and what's needed in order to market the crop.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better, a Circle B podcast. Each week, I invite you to care more about a specific issue so that we can create a better world together. As part of my commitment to create a better, greener world, I'm planting a tree for each new subscriber on my website, circleb.co. When you join, you'll be the first to hear about new episodes as they're published, exclusive promotions, and more. So join our circle by visiting circleb.co today. Today, we're going to deepen our understanding of what it takes to grow food responsibly as we connect with a 5-generation farmer from Turlock, California. Allie Cox is an agricultural and food ingredient marketing visionary who founded Noble West, an award-winning marketing firm that specializes in the entire agricultural ecosystem. With an eye on a future of farming and the climate crisis, Cox regularly consults on upcycling projects, regenerative water use, and hydroponic and organic farming practices. With that, let me welcome her to the stage. Allie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Corinna. Lovely to be here.
I have read a bit about your history and heard you speak on other podcasts as well. You've been an award-winning silver medalist in the Olympics in 2004. You've launched a marketing consultancy. You have a career path that has been, let's just say, unique. So how did these experiences as both an athlete and a professional influencer influence your work essentially now in this space of agriculture?
You know, everything you just said is right. And now I think that there's just probably every woman, they're like the onion just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The layers continue to peel, right? So now as a mom and as, a primary contributor to purchasing products and goods for my home, it sort of continues to build. But I think my background and my childhood in agriculture has just really set me up for kind of a different way to approach food. And that's really why I started Noble West from my apartment in New York City, after working in entertainment and in sports and competing at the Olympics, was really there just is, to me, it was just a huge ocean of difference between what consumers understood about their food sources at scale and what farmers are receiving from a return on investment standpoint, and also from just honestly consumer awareness. We always say this is one of the only industries where farmers I don't want to say dislike their customers, but quite frankly are baffled in many ways because they're not always getting all the information. So that's where I just think, being a farmer's daughter and granddaughter and great granddaughter and farmer's wife is super helpful from a connection standpoint, and also just credibility to help farmers kind of tell those stories better and also educate consumers about their food sources.
Well, I think the challenge of a farmer is that they know their business very, very well. And the consumer doesn't necessarily understand what they're asking for when they're asking for something. I work in the health and nutrition space specifically to supplements. And I often encounter people who think that organic means one thing and that non-GMO means something else. And they don't necessarily have a deep understanding of what each of these certifications can mean. Now we're adding something else to that, this whole regenerative organic perspective. And now there are 2 certifications under this. You have ROC, or Regenerative Organic Certification, and you have the Regen certification. So there's going to be confusion on the part of consumers who are really, they're trying to put their health first, but they don't really understand all the nuts and bolts that are twisted in the background to make something come to fruition on their plate. And I think that ends up being a frustration of anybody who works in that kind of supply field, whether it be for the food, the literal, apple or tomato that ends up in your crisper drawer, or something that is combined ingredients like a recipe in a box that you go ahead and make at home. I feel it. I hear it from my community. I have some friends in the Leonardini family who've talked to me about their frustrations around organic certification that are here on the Central Coast. And I'm like, oh, hadn't thought about it that way. And it's interesting to hear their deeper perspective. But I wonder, if you had to put your finger on it, what do you think is the most frustrating for them, if there is one thing?
I think that it all kind of goes back to, certifications are so great for so many reasons, right? They, verify, they provide, ability to kind of scale certain practices. There are certain buyers. I think there's so many great reasons for certifications. And what I often see happen in the agriculture industry is we get so committed to making those incredible on-farm changes that are very expensive, but they're typically made on a hope and a dream. That's why, an assumption that a consumer is going to care about it, or a market will be there, or a buyer will be there. And that's where I just find so many farmers really struggling, because they will go through the organic transition or certification, or they will go through the regenerative certification and then be like, okay, I've just doubled my operational costs on farm. What's in it for me now? Right. And that to me is the most heartbreaking thing. And that's where I just find that consumers, climate related farming practices, are very distant fourth when it comes to consumer appetite and how consumers make choices in the stores, and online and all the other places where they're getting their consumers. And I think it's super important that, to me, Corinna, that we just put a pin in that. We're talking about food at scale. We're not talking about the farmer's market or your CSA, or this is not a neighborhood approach, right? This is the food system, because I think we're both really committed to seeing improvements with our climate through agricultural practices. But this is where consumers are making their choices based on availability of the food, based on the price of the food, and the taste. Distant fourth is how it's grown, and the farming practices or the climate related practices. And it's just been proven out that climate forward messaging on packaging and in marketing doesn't really work. It's sort of a guilt driven purchase versus I've seen that data from General Mills, from large scale initiatives. But that's where I just think educating, the term regenerative, even if you were to just go and ask people on the street in an average town, what does regenerative mean? Or in a big city, sometimes I think people think it's medicinal, which you could argue it is sort of medicinal, but I think it's just, there's a lot to be desired in how we are marketing it.
Well, language, right? And language also changes. The buzzword on the street used to be sustainable, right? You'd say sustainable ag. Yeah. But now there's even some eschewing of that terminology.
Yeah. And then you ask conventional farmer what sustainable means. They're it means that we're able to sustain our business and stay in business. And so it's that we're not selling to a housing developer. So it's definitely you can see how it does get confusing. And that is what drives me every day, is how can we help our clients get a better return on investment for their food products that are, and with our Rock certified clients, oh my goodness, the amount of cost and care that goes into every single product is incredibly it's just pointed, and it is so intentional. And if they do not get the ROI, and obviously these folks are their retail partners are the Whole Foods, are Wegmans, are Sprouts, are Nugget, are really more of an Air One, a higher end, and also of course the Thrives and e-commerce retailers. But if they don't get that ROI, they're going to be out of business, and it's kind of sad, and something that I just kind of feel very a responsibility to to provide access points to continue to farm in the way they want to.
Yeah. Well, in our last episode, we took a deep dive into the world of coffee for example. with the founders of Big B Coffee, and they're working to create really a system that is beyond fair trade, because trade is such it's a massive issue in the coffee world, as it is in the cacao world. And this reminds me of something that I saw just a couple weeks ago at Costco. I found a regenerative organic certified cacao powder, and it was a sizable bag for only $20. And I'm looking at this and going, how is this possible? Like, something along the way has to be broken for this to be here at this price, because I know what it costs to buy cacao and to do so from a regenerative organic certified farm just seemed very suspect to me. I haven't dug deeper into it, but when you come from a world where you see the cost of pulling these marketing projects together, then you start to see that in many cases, we've been conditioned to pay an unfairly low price for some of the foods or the treats that we've come to rely on, whether it be a favorite chocolate bar or that cup of coffee. And it really it kind of gets into your psyche and under your skin and makes you think more deeply about what the true cost of food is. What is the true cost of running a farm? What is the true cost when it's not subsidized by government and taxes of putting that food on your plate? The things that are most subsidized are corn and soy, right? So not surprisingly, these ingredients end up in almost every food that we find on the shelf that's packaged. This is kind of a problem. And I feel like it's something that even on the farmer side that is confronted, because I've heard from several that because of the water restriction that we see in California, especially in the last few drought seasons, that they're having to make choices about what they grow and how they grow it on the land that they have. And then they'll also see something like, well, okay, but if you're only going to plant these many acres, then we're going to reduce your water allotment. And so they're caught in this, kind of quandary where they're not getting quite enough water to grow the yield that makes sense from a financial perspective on the land that they can plant for that water allotment. And so they want to go down in their, let's say, growing field capacity for just a little bit or for that season, given the water allotment. And then they're being told, oh, well, we'll further titrate down the water we allot you, restricting then their ability to remain profitable and in business. And I think so few people really understand this, that it's something that we almost need to talk about more. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily from someone in your seat, but I just love to know from your perspective, if this is something that's even coming up in conversation as farmers are looking to say, how do I communicate about my farm in a better way so that I can make the profits I need to stay in business and grow?
Sure. And my answer to you is yes, and because I would be happy to talk about everything you just mentioned. I can talk about it from a personal standpoint as far as fallowing land and like really, really decreasing our rotational crops, decreasing our row crops. Produce is really something, produce and fresh veggies are something that really becomes compromised because, like you mentioned, Corinna, those permanent crops in drought years will get the water. So because there are millions of dollars tied up in orchards, in vineyards, in groves where there has been investments in ag technology, in drip irrigation, in trees, in nursery costs, in pruning costs. It continue, we keep going, through and through like that laundry list. We work very, very deeply in the California rice industry. Noble West has for, 11 or 12 years. And I would argue we probably market about 40% of the California rice industry along with our clients. And the truth is the rice industry in the last, to get super granular, in the last drought, basically all of the fields, the rice fields that were west of I-5 did not have water. East of I-5 did, and it was along the river. And what typically is like a 1 million acre like crop was a 700, 500, 400. It was a huge drop in production. So that meant, like, frankly, in California, we grow short grain and medium grain rice. It's used for sake and it's used for sushi rice. That's the primary reason, and different Asian cuisines. And that is a place where sure, the price of rice skyrocketed. Like the per pound price increased, but the volume decreased. And so it really affected kind of like the global price of rice. And it, quite frankly, it opened up a huge market for Australia and different countries who are experimenting with short grain rice to come in. And so now what was a very domestic protected crop. I mean, there's tons of exports to Japan and whatnot because we just have so much more acreage, is now we're competing globally. And I would argue if we really want to talk about climate, we could talk about cargo ships and the amount of pollution that's put out into the world. So I just really believe in seasonal eating. I believe in regional eating. That's one of the reasons why I am so pro hydroponic, which I would argue is probably, to some of my 5th generation farming ancestors would like kind of blow their mind. But I think there should be hydroponic in every climate. I think that we should all have the biodiversity and availability to have nutrients, even if you live in a snowy area. I would rather see more hydroponic at scale than, frankly, trucks like crossing mountain regions.
So let's help people understand hydroponics for a moment, because they might have heard the term with regard to something like a tomato, or perhaps they've heard it with regard to cannabis, growing your weed. You don't have to have an incredibly large system in order to operate this way, or you can operate in a kind of greenhouse capacity with a vertical farm. Like vertical farming uses this technology. It's very water wise. It uses a fraction of the water because the water can be reused and recirculated so much. And then there are some that are even integrating aquaponics when they're doing home systems. So they have like essentially fish, feeding fertilizer to the plants that they're growing. And I've seen some quite creative walls of these. And I personally have a Watex wall myself, which uses soil, but which is very water wise because it's drip irrigation. And then only the top set are irrigated and they water those below them just via drip. So it's a really smart use of water and soil. I grow my different greens and also herbs and things along those lines, but I'm not growing a large amount of food to feed a community.
I love it though. You're doing it. I mean, good for you. I couldn't even imagine wrapping my arms around that right now.
Well, you have 2 children. I have 2 boys too. They keep you busy. And then when you work and you're in a space where you're owning your own business and having to spend all this time marketing and networking and going on podcasts.
Saving the world from our food. It's very busy. Yeah. No, but I mean, hydroponics is something that we have worked on a project in Tennessee. But to your point, it is very water wise, but it's also like, I mean, the amount of there are the inputs, since it is a climate, it's really a very protected climate controlled growing environment. So, I mean, from like a pesticide use, there's none. There's barely any fertilizers. It's also very labor friendly because, there's a lot of robots. I mean, it is a huge investment, but it is truly like the bioavailability just skyrockets, especially in places like Canada is very hydroponic friendly. The Middle East is kind of growing in places where like just fresh produce is so valued as part of their food system. And in a lot of those places, really a delicacy.
Yeah. Well, I just returned from Iceland this summer. I work with Vaxa Technologies and we grow algae in a vertical capacity, but they also get almost all of their produce, at least insofar as greens and things along that, greens, tomatoes, things like that, are all grown vertical farms, aquaponics, or in some sort of a greenhouse system. And that's because everything has to be imported otherwise. So if all of your food essentially has to be imported, you have to be really careful and you have to create resources that are going to be backyard oriented, or the prices just get really untenable. Now, these are solutions that can work in concert with, of course, growing grains like rice in larger fields, because you can't really do that in an aquaponic system. It's just not quite scalable enough. So if we look at something like rice, I have interviewed before the founders of Lotus Foods who talked about more crop per drop and regenerative organic certification processes for rice farmers and small crop holders around the world. Are they able to integrate some of these systems to California rice, or is it just not the same varietal and therefore wouldn't work the same?
Right. I love Lotus Foods. That's a great brand. So I mean, most California rice is grown in a rice paddy, right? Where there is, I don't know, 2 to 3 feet of water. I would argue there are, and I would say the California rice industry has done a great job talking about sort of the environmental benefits of like improving the aquifer, and then also just like wildlife and like how it's like, a mating area for birds and whatnot. I would argue it is regenerative in many ways. It's also a very low input crop. So as far as, and I mean, I think are they primarily growing their crop in Thailand, if I recall?
They work to remarket essentially, and source different growers, like small crop farmers. A lot of the farmers they work with are smaller crop. And so they've been advocating for them and involved them in the process of creating the regenerative organic certification processes, because otherwise you really wouldn't have any small crop farmers able to participate in that world.
Yeah. And a lot of times in rice, particularly, like that we're down this rice rabbit hole. I'm sure you didn't think we were going here.
No, but it's good. It's a good example. I think most cultures eat rice, so it's an important crop.
Every culture. And that's one of the reasons why rice and beans, and we market beans too. So I always think that's fun. But what I was going to say is I think that the Lumbergs have done a great job championing like California rice. I believe they are Rockside certified. But they do have regenerative branding. They've done a great job like championing and educating consumers. And we need leaders within each commodity type who are actually doing the work of educating the consumers. I do believe it's the brand's job, and it's the mill's job or the packer's job. And that's where, so much of, I think the rice industry, that's where most people are being educated, which, I really commend them for.
So with your work specifically, you hone in on things like regenerative farming, upcycling, and innovative water use techniques. Some of that could be the hydroponics. If I look at upcycling, I've seen of late a few different companies, in particular out of Washington, that are very focused on, creating new uses for foods that would otherwise be rejected. I think some of them are a little silly, like dried fruit from ugly fruit. I'm like, isn't that always what was used for dried fruit?
No, I'm going to jump in. The answer is no. No, there isn't. And there is a phenomenal, the Ugly Fruit Company is a great brand. They're based in Farmersville outside of Fresno. And it's a great story. And if people, anyway, I think they are on Thrive and Amazon, but the Ugly Fruit Company they are taking waste. And because honestly, the founder was a truck driver and he was the one hauling away the waste. And he's like, this is crazy. And that's part of the reason why he kind of like decided to build that brand. But I think traditionally, probably when I remember drying fruit myself on racks and dehydrating tomatoes and whatnot. And you were taking the less pleasant looking produce. But I just don't even see, so many of our clients are, working with labor contractors and whatnot. I don't even see the interest in actually, what our work in upcycling that we're doing is, honestly encouraging farmers to go for that last harvest. Oftentimes the difference between food loss and food waste is very intentional to me. And that's where I think there's the food loss. So if we, back to water, like the ground's been paid for, the insurance has been paid for, the seed, all the farming practices, it's been irrigated. And then just to leave imperfect fruit is something that, number one, breeds disease for permanent crops. But then number two, just leaves a lot there. But what has happened is oftentimes the farmers haven't been incentivized properly and they can't actually afford the labor to go through and pick it again. And so that's when it gets left behind. So we've been working with a client of ours. It's based in Fresno, California, and it's called Sierra Agra. And they are basically creating a new marketplace and just a better path where a farmer is compensated for the grade outs and the culls that would have either gone to silage or, just rotted. And so they are actually making a profit from, I don't know about a profit, I should be careful with that word. They're being compensated for that product and then it's being upcycled into juices, essences, purees, fragrances, oils, and aseptic. And the fact of the matter is these products are wonderful, and they are competing with some mainstream products as well. So, but it is a way for brands that want to have, ingredients that are upcycled to have this.
Well, it makes sense to me. So just to give people a quick summary, let's say you have an apple orchard and the apples are all mostly ripe around the same time. They come through, they're picked, but then some fruit isn't ripe and doesn't come off with the shaking or whatever they do to get the apples to fall. And so it's essentially left there to rot because it's not worth it to come back through with all the laborers to resolve that. So that fruit would end up falling. Is that essentially what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and I think apples are still handpicked. So is stone
are they
fruit.
still handpicked?
So stone fruit, so citrus.
I've seen footage of the shakers coming through to shake the apple trees and have the apples fall. Maybe that's originally used technology, but yeah.
I don't know, but if we really want to talk about that, and how gross is that? So that means you basically have apples that are picked raw so that they are more durable, and they're not and then they're going to
they go on cold storage and they're in a ship
12 months, and then they're pumped with ethylene so that they don't ripe, or they ripe on time. I mean, this is part of the problem.
Yeah, that is part of the problem, but that's traditionally, I think the bulk of growers are growing and procuring the apples that way, and then they are in cold storage for 9 months.
It's gross. It's just gross. And yeah, I mean, we have a harvesting business for almonds and walnuts, and there's a shake, and this, like, back to regenerative, it's not necessarily terribly regenerative, but like you have to get the crop off of the tree, right? So like there is a wonderful brand called the Bros, the Bros Family Farm. They are probably the largest acreage for rock certified almonds, and they're doing off-ground harvesting. So they're actually harvesting, instead of the shaking into the ground and they dry on the ground, they are actually shaking off ground, and with a pistachio. And I always like to give them a shout out, because if regenerative agriculture is something that you are passionate about supporting, they're the best of the best. And
what is the company name again?
It's called the Burroughs Family Farm.
The Burroughs Family Farm.
Yeah, the almond butter. And they host a lot of regenerative, continuing education programs in colleges, and they have open house, and they invite people to their farm all the time. But that is where they have overnight, this was about 3 years ago when they decided to go rock certified. They've always been organic, but rock certified overnight became, like sheep herders. So that is a place where, and so when you see the price point for some of their products, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, that's quite pricey. But then if you think about it, they're also managing like herds, so that they are running herds and managing livestock in their orchards for a regenerative, farming experience. And those are part of the stories that I think consumers need to understand, because once you hear the amount of painstaking innovation and effort that goes into it, you're like, you know what? If you're mentioning how little we pay for food. I mean, in the United States, for a developed country, we pay the least amount of food per person than most developed countries, and I just don't think we're used to it. And I don't see consumers making food decisions that are value aligned with a lot of their other choices.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem is too, especially young single people tend to eat out a lot. And how many restaurants do you know that are taking the extra time to really be farm to table, or to really care about the regenerative organic story? There are the higher end ones, but most are not telling that story. They're more concerned with what the food tastes like, and, at the end of the day, ensuring that they can remain profitable, because restauranting is such a tough business. So I know that for myself, I utilize a CSA. I get mine from Santa Cruz Permaculture. They run classes on regenerative organic and help people understand what it takes to grow foods in a variety of capacities. but it also limits me on what vegetables I can get during what seasons. So it keeps me focused, like you just shared earlier, on using food that is seasonally available. Now, I'm getting the last of my peaches at the farmers markets now. I know those are out of season. Same with plums and things like that. So I have to embrace the winter fruits that I don't love quite so much, or just use frozen berries. But this is something that I love. I mean, I will spend more on great food because it's a total body experience when you have really great food. It's good for you. It's better for the planet. So I love everything we've talked about so far. I wanted to give people another example to draw from that I think you might have some experience with, and that is specifically the berries I just mentioned. I think one of the problems that we face when it comes to procuring fresh foods that we love is that they often come with a lot of excess packaging. And in the case of berries, this is the real problem. If you're trying to get out of the world of plastics, the only way that you're getting berries is either picking it yourself, which growing or picking it yourself. If you are going to a farmer's market that actually has them in a paper carton or something of that sort, or you're getting them in plastic clamshells, like all the Driscolls and everybody else around the globe. They ship that product from Mexico up north and from Watsonville to stores all over the United States, including all the way to Hawaii. This is how they're packaged. You kind of have to accept it, or perhaps you go to the frozen aisle and you buy them in a big bag. But everything in the berry space is essentially packaged in plastic in this day and age. And so for those that are more concerned with that, makes it tough. And I think it also is tough from the grower perspective because they just want to make sure that their product gets to the end user in a capacity that isn't spoiled, because though it has to ventilate well, because otherwise berries can rot and they'll get moldy and things like that. It has to protect them. And doing these two things when you're talking large shipments and refrigerated trucks can be a challenge. So I wonder if you work on any projects like this, or if you have any visibility into what decisions they're making kind of backroom.
Yeah, I just want to like advocate for like the Driscolls of the world and the grow packer shippers is the food safety criteria that is required now.
I mean, that just got a big sigh out of me. I
That
get
is
it.
like, I mean, that is the antithesis of what we're trying to do. I mean, so even if you are a well-intentioned, well-meaning grower packer shipper who cares about what they're doing and is, using low till and driving slow in the field, I mean, doing all the right things, like when you get down to the food safety side of it, like you will go out of business if you are not using plastic at this point at scale. Like it is just such a bummer. And again, I think that's why we're advocating for like locally grown food. Hydroponically grown berries are delicious, and you can avoid the whole clamshell situation.
I didn't know you could grow them hydroponically,
Oh
frankly.
my gosh.
I've grown
Yes.
raspberries and blackberries and strawberries. I mean, strawberries I could see, but I'm talking about like more of the vining or caning berries.
Not sure about that, but I was just asked to work on a strawberry project in, I don't know, Calgary, because they're growing berries, which was fun. But I think this is where, again, it's those value aligned decisions. So in the case of like what's better for the planet, better for me, I think you're right on. It's a frozen berry that is like honestly it is harvested, washed, and flash frozen within typically like 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, they're peak ripeness. They're picked at peak ripening. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, I mean, I know that in my household, that's what we do because my kids will actually eat berries year round. And so that's what we do. But I think that it's really about that value aligned decision. I think we can also, Corinna, call out the whole recycling industry who have really just ruined everything. So where like, we were sort of been taught.
I mean, it really makes me want to cry most days. It really does.
It's cringeworthy, frankly.
Yeah.
It's just really cringeworthy. Where we're basically being lied to about what's recyclable and what's not. So then you have grower packer shippers who are doing everything they can to educate you to like take off the sticker. It's only recyclable if you take off the sticker, and they're buying certain kinds of stickers. So that way their packaging is recyclable. But again, there is so much legwork that goes into that. I think that it's really just about eating regionally, eating seasonally, and and being like making sure that those decisions that you're making align with, again, with your values. And if you're somebody that is very climate focused, this is a decision. I mean, you're not supposed to have a salad in the middle of winter unless it's grown hydroponically.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. I will say too, you have me thinking about with the peeling of the stickers. I have just been reading this book by Mark Easter. I'm going to show it on screen. He was a recent guest on the podcast. It's called The Blue Plate and Food Lover's Guide to Climate Chaos. It's available as audiobook too, narrated by the author. And in it, he tells a story of a farmer who is using compost to help along his fruit trees, his peaches. And I think that chapter is chapter 5 called Steve's Peaches.
Okay.
And it's a grower in California. Okay. And so he's going through and he's getting mad because he notices all the plastic stickers that have come along with the produce. Because the stickers on produce are made of plastic. They're not compostable, but people don't peel them off when they put the waste in their compost bin. And so it does end up in the compost and product that is then used commercially. I was unaware of that, right? I thought these things must be biodegradable, but since then have started to peel the stickers off each time and throw them in the garbage. Awareness is important. But again, the fact that the responsibility is in my hands when really it should just be that the stickers we use are biodegradable. If they go on a food product, that would be better for us too. That would be introducing less microplastics into our environment, especially if these things end up composted into fields that are used to grow food again. So it's a frustration point, right? Like we have been at the mercy of industry.
It's also an opportunity for innovation, right? Like, and again, this goes actually back to food safety, Corinna. This is where and I'm telling you, I worked on the sticker line at Turlock Fruit Company when I was like a child. Like, so I know exactly about the sticker line. And every melon had to have a sticker. Right. And so, but this is like ripe for innovation. In many cases, like couldn't like a beet-based sticker or a stamp or something. I mean, there's also transparency that is like, and traceability that is like utilized through most products. Fresh fruit is just like so far behind the game. I think that's I think that's what we're kind of getting to is like fresh produce is doing everything they can to remain profitable and also, food safety, like remain within their like food safety, like certifications and requirements that the industry just has not evolved fast enough. And, it's IFPA week right now in, Atlanta. And those are some of the trends trends I'm like looking forward to following is like, what is the innovation in fresh produce with branding? And,
so is the IFPA like International Fresh Produce Association?
And flour.
I guessed it. So,
and flour. So I think that this goes back to education though. I mean, if we're talking about an old industry that thinks that they're going to educate consumers by putting a sticker on their produce, I just think that's kind of passé, right? There's a million other ways that this could be done. There's QR codes in grocery stores. There's a million other ways, but I think the food safety side of it is like part of the problem.
So I wonder where you stand with regard to this world of advocating for farmers and let's say the intersection of just the consumer's right to know something like GMOs. Do you have a particular perspective when it comes to that? Or do you have purview into how farmers specifically see genetically modified versus, not options?
Well, obviously, I believe in non-GMO. I'm feeding a family also. But I think what's important to say is that, like, if we want American farmers to be competitive here in the United States, they need an equal playing field. And the truth of the matter is, if you are buying international produce or international foods, understanding like you can't control all the ingredients that are within, like that's where I think government should actually step in. But so I'm saying this more in like a whole food eating experience, not necessarily an ingredient. But we could argue that that's another podcast. We could argue that a couple different ways. But I think that that's where like farmers just need an equal playing field. So if if we're importing like fruits that's grown like by in any old standard, and sure, this is, USDA certified and whatnot, that's where I just don't think it's fair at all.
Understood. So, what do you think the key challenges are presently that farmers are facing? And how does your company help them navigate these difficulties while staying competitive?
I think working with their mill, their processing plants, their grower, packer, shipper, whatever label they're selling their crop under, understanding kind of what they're doing and where their focuses are, and then somehow like challenging and like kind of just staying abreast of what's happening and what's needed in order to market the crop. I think so many farmers are like, okay, it's on the truck. I got it out of the field. I'm done. Especially if they don't own a mill or they're not vertically integrated, they don't need, that's it. They're just going to sit there and wait for the check, or not sit there, but they're going to wait for the check. Right. And that's where I just ask lots of questions. How is a product being marketed? How are they opening up new revenue cycles? Are they doing any innovation? Are they doing product innovation? Do you align with like the long-term vision of wherever you're selling? Is this the right contract? Are you getting the value you need out of your contract based on what your growing processes are? I mean, those are just where I think like dynamic, well-informed business conversations are really like critical.
So, what I've found working in the space of health with regard to sales and marketing is that often companies are already doing things that they're just not communicating about. Like they're already doing a lot that's good and right, but they're not bringing it forward in their messaging, or they're kind of not sure how to bring the message forward or how to speak about the things that they're doing to be 10 or 20% better than their closest competitor. Imagine that you would spend a fair amount of time in that space, but then also in helping them identify how they can competitively stand up on their own 2 feet in a challenging marketplace.
Well, I think that the value in this, this is what we do at Noble West. The value in telling that story, especially if you are a food manufacturer or a processor or a packer shipper, understanding to how to tell it, because you are absolutely right. And I'm glad you mentioned it. In California, it is such a rigorous place to farm anyway. It's typically like you are doing most things right by ESG standards. So understanding your end customer, whether it's like your grocery retailer, whether it is a brand, whether it, whomever that end customer is, I will guarantee you, if they are a Fortune 500 food company, they are talking about their ESG goals and their food supply requirements, right? Like that's where, like, if we could actually just package it up with a nice little bow, talk about your solar installation, your social responsible practices, your, your zero waste water, efficiencies and recycling plant that you just installed, your electric forklifts, your new packaging, all of the things, your on-farm practices, package that up in a little marketing bow, you will get more ROI. You will be doing better than your competitors. And that's where our clients who are probably more innovative and kind of future focused and future thinking are like, okay, we've got to get a bigger return back to our growers or our family or whomever it is, because if we don't, we're just not being competitive. And what got us here is not going to get us there. And the tides have turned. And I think there's just such a more of a microscope. And I think there's a lot of complaining about sort of ESG from the food side, but I actually think it's good. I think it's an opportunity for us to get a bigger return on investment because the end brand is actually doing the legwork and the heavy lift on kind of shouting from the rooftops in their investor reports, in their, C-suite claims, in kind of that is where I think there's actually an opportunity for ag.
So you mentioned a few things I want to clarify. ESG simply means environmental sustainability goals. So people in the world of business, running businesses that are working to be sustainable have often heard this, but not necessarily the end users. You've also mentioned a couple of times mills. And I think I want to help people understand if they're hearing this and they kind of don't understand all of the frame that we're talking about. You have growers, but sometimes they aren't completely vertically integrated. So they might not process the food to its final package, which means they're growing wheat, but they're not they're not milling it down to a flour that is then packaged and sold. So they're selling it into, let's say, a commodity marketplace that is then being processed and then sold under something else. You've also mentioned packers, growers as kind of being two separate entities. And I know often even within the fruit world, you have your grower, but then it is, packaged and labeled by somebody else and sold under a particular brand. Some of those brands are growing their own brand. Like Dole, they grow and package their own. Same with, Driscoll's berries. But that may not be the case for everybody.
Asterisks, though. Driscoll's does grow. They have a lot of their own acreage, but they also probably have a couple hundred contract growers.
Mm-hmm. They also have contract packers. So.
Yeah. So, but that is something that is like, I think in order to sustain, that's common practice.
Yeah. So it's complicated. And this is how we feed humanity, right?
It's crazy.
I know.
So like 33% of like what climate pollution. I mean, like it's crazy.
And a lot of that is transportation, but a lot of it is methane and it's fertilizers and it's runoff and how much fertilizer we throw on the land, sometimes in excess of what's needed. So it's a deep conversation that will only get deeper as our understanding grows. At this point in a conversation, I like to ask my guests to either package for me some closing thoughts that they'd like our audience to leave today with, or if there's a question that I haven't asked that you perhaps wish I had, you could also ask and answer that.
Oh, thank you. I think the biggest thing I love for your audience to kind of just think about maybe is how they make value aligned food choices based on kind of their choices that they make when they're sitting in a restaurant and purchasing food for their family and understanding that. And I think your example of the frozen berry versus the berry that's grown in Mexico or wherever is perfectly on point. Is how do we in our day-to-day make decisions that align with what we really want for this world?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful thought to end today's conversation on. Frankly, if we could all be a little bit more intentional in our choices when it comes to the things that we buy, especially when we put them in or on our bodies, like this is an important thing. It affects the health of our families. It affects our personal health. I mean, that would be wonderful. Now, I know a lot of people are strapped for cash and they're making decisions that don't necessarily always 100% align. But I frankly made the choice last year, or in the beginning of January this year, really, to transition to almost completely plant-based eating. And I will still consume some animal products from time to time, including the thyroid medication that I take every day because it is from porcine thyroid and nothing else works for me. So it's just what I got to take, right? I say, even if that was the case, because that's the case, I'm not likely to ever be a full vegan. It's just medical realities of today, right?
I think give yourself a little grace there.
Right. Well, that too. And my reasons for switching to almost completely plant-based are really not 100% on the ethical side, though I have massive issues with how we traditionally farm animals. They're on that earth first perspective because I understand the environmental cost. And essentially, if you go to cut out the pig or the cow, you can eat the primary food as opposed to eat the secondary food of the animal. And that's kind of where my head is at insofar as the environmental cost of growing a lot of these food sources. So people can make these choices. Frankly, if they're choosing berries for example, and they love that as their fruit, you can get a really great tasting, fully nutritious berry that's less expensive and organic from the frozen aisle over the produce aisle almost any time of year.
Yes.
And that's like something I advocate for constantly because I also have young boys. And guess what? They will eat frozen berries all day long if I let them.
Yeah, I know. That's great.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Allie. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Corinna.
To find out more about Allie Cox and her work with Noble West, see the links that we provide with show notes on your favorite podcasting platform. I also encourage you to visit the blog page for this episode on circleb.co. It includes the video version of this podcast, complete transcripts, and links to the resources and relevant past episodes that we touched on today. I'll be sure to include links to the few companies that Allie mentioned today, including the Ugly Fruit Co. There were one or two others as well. So just go and visit circleb.co today. And while you visit, please join our newsletter and make the world a little greener. For every subscriber to our circle, we're planting another tree through our partnership with Forest Planet and 1% for the planet. Remember, Circle B is a cause before commerce, education resource, and marketplace. We offer eco-friendly products that help you reduce your reliance on plastic while supporting the companies that seek to do everything right. You'll find responsibly made household products, consumables, and gift items ripe for the holiday picking. I personally recently purchased one of the Waytex growing walls so that I could grow my own produce in the winter months even, including strawberries, which can actually produce fruit year-round in California, and also several different species of lettuce that I like to consume. So feel free to take a peek, browse our selection, and see if there's something that speaks to you. Remember, 1% of all sales benefit Earth First charities through our partnership with 1% for the Planet. So join our circle and let's build that greener world together. Thank you, listeners and watchers, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more, we can be better, we can grow better food, use our resources wisely, live a little better, and reduce our carbon footprint along the way. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.